UFC 305 just wrapped up and an amazing card. It absolutely delivered, great finishes, a lot of competitive fights, a lot of split decisions, and a card I thought was going to be for the favorites, it turned out to be for the underdogs. A lot of the underdogs won. The craziest one was Kai Kara-France knocking out Steve Erceg, landing that double overhand combo. I don't know how Dricus Du Plessis beating these legendary fighters the way he is. Jingliang getting knocked out for the first time in his career. Dan Hooker, rejuvenated, looking as good as ever. Just a great card throughout, and I would give it like a 8 out of 10. Really good fights. The main event absolutely delivered. It was competitive. We got an Adesanya who was looking for a finish. He was aggressive, going forward and trading with Dricus at times. It's great to see Adesanya step out of that point fighting style and actually make it an exciting fight. But Dricus Du Plessis won by a 4th round submission. He proved to be the most dangerous grappler Adesanya has ever fought in his career. A guy who can wrestle, a guy who has good submissions, very good at the back take, and just the most awkward, confusing striking style at the highest level of middleweight. And none of these great strikers can counter that style. It's weird. Whitaker, great striker. Adesanya, great striker. Sean Strickland, great striker. And none of them were able to counter this South African drunken master. I remember when Dricus came into the UFC and he said that he was going to bring a style that's going to change the game or something like that. Well, we expected like some kind of ninja, super precise sniping kind of style, perfect technique, all that stuff. But no, he really came into the fight game with a very different kind of striking style. Even though it looks kind of ugly, it is very effective though. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. It's kind of like Khabib, right? Khabib, a lot of stuff he used to do was ugly looking, wasn't great in form or technique, but it was very effective. And what was awesome about that fight was Dricus showing respect to Adesanya after. He's a professional who's just trying to win in competition and show that he's the best. Gave props to Adesanya's skills as well. If there was a modern championship fighter who looks like he put all of his training in strength and conditioning and none of it in technique, it looked like Dricus in a way. Not that it's true, of course, but it just looks that way because we're so used to a formula of technique and skill at the highest level. Then Dricus comes into the scene and just looks so different than everybody else. His timing is great, and he's just a fighter who is so powerful and big. Those punches will rock anyone if they land. He also fights through his fatigue better than anybody. He looks exhausted but isn't fighting like he is. It's impressive how tough Dricus is. I mean, the body shots landing, he was tired, but just kept pushing through. Rocked Adesanya in the 4th round. For a guy that big to hold his power that late into a fight is pretty crazy. And then finishing the fight with a rear naked choke. Adesanya's takedown defense looked much better until he got rocked. Sprawled that one takedown in the center of the cage and wrestled well off of the fence. He just didn't counter much, which I thought would have been his main focus for a fight against Dricus specifically. But yeah, amazing fight, man. Both guys made it really exciting, and it looks like Dricus is going to be fighting Sean Strickland next. That's the fight that most likely is going to happen. We know Pereira was talking about moving down to 185 after if he beats Khalil Roundtree. But we also have like Robert Whitaker fighting Hamza Chimaev. We have Nasruddin Imavov. We have Brendan Allen versus Marvin Vettori. There's a lot of contenders fighting for the #1 contender spot. And for Israel Adesanya, I would say if he can fight either Brendan Allen or Nasruddin Imavov, those would be good fights for him. What about Kai Kara-France knocking out Steve Erceg in the 1st round? Kai was throwing the same right overhand, left overhand combo until it landed, just spamming that combination, but then the angle on the left overhand landed perfectly in front of Erceg's guard. That's a fight for you, man. Erceg did the right technique, but MMA gloves are too small to cover the whole side of the head. He was moving away, he picked his hand up, the punch landed right in front of the hand, dropping him, and then Kai Kara-France just exploded for the knockout. That guy hit so hard for a 125er, and you have to give him a title shot next. Alexander Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France, the rematch, should be the next one for 125. I think Pantoja's probably going to win again. His chin is just too durable, much better on the ground than Kai is as well. And as for Steve Erceg, I'd say him fight maybe Amir Albazi or Manel Kep. What about Dan Hooker defeating Mateusz Gamrot by a decision, split decision? And Hooker just looked better than we've ever seen him since he fought Dustin Poirier. Maybe his tattoos did improve him somehow. It's like he's transformed. But this was an entertaining fight. Even Gamrot was throwing hands with Hooker. They both dropped each other in the 1st round. Both landed a bunch of shots after. Gamrot cut Hooker up too, so he did have that with the scoring criteria. Cuts do matter when it comes to effective striking. and he also had effective grappling in the first round, which is why I thought he won the first round. Gamrot got rocked because his eyes were off of Hooker while he was guarding and moving along the cage, and for round 2 I scored it for Hooker, landing elbows, going for the guillotine, doing damage while Gamrot was only looking to get the takedown really. He didn't really do much damage to Hooker in the second round. And then in round 3, very close, both guys landed harsh shots, but that last left hook from Hooker was the biggest punch of the round. Hooker looked way more explosive in this fight. That strength and conditioning program that him, Adesanya, and Kai were in definitely helped Hooker. I would say for their next fights, Dan Hooker versus Charles Oliveira would be a good one. Oliveira can finally fight Hooker for calling him Charlie Olives. And as for Mateusz Gamrot, maybe a rematch with Rafael Fiziev, because that fight did end with an injury. Then Jairzinho Rozenstruik defeats Tuivasa by a split decision. One of the scorecards was 30-27 for Tuivasa, which is probably one of the worst scorecards in UFC history. I don't know how you can score even a round for Tuivasa, let alone every round of the fight, but they did tell the guy that scored it for Tuivasa that he cannot score any more fights for the rest of the card. Rozenstruik still winning fights with a check hook and a lead leg kick, and Tuivasa mostly fought in Rozenstruik's kind of game, a slower paced kickboxing back and forth, but Tuivasa was still able to show a very good chin. He ate some big shots from Rozenstruik. He may have broke his foot or injured his foot in some way when he kicked the shin of Rozenstruik, who was really good at checking kicks. Rozenstruik just showed to be way too technical and skilled in the stand-up for Tuivasa. And that is now 5 losses in a row for Tuivasa. He'll probably get another fight. I don't see them cutting him for that. He's a big fan favorite. You know, the Australian crowd loves him. He always brings on an entertaining fight. So maybe they give him Walter Walker, although that fight might turn out similar to the way Walker beat Junior Tafa, or they could just give him some non-ranked heavyweight that will trade with him on the feet. And as for Rozenstruik, maybe they can give him Spivak. I mean, this guy's fought almost everybody in the top 15. It's crazy. He's fought so many ranked contenders. Anybody outside the top 5 and in the top 10 maybe. So from number 10 to number 6, anyone in that range I think makes sense for Rozenstruik. What about Carlos Prates, becoming the first fighter ever to knock Jingliang out? The Leech didn't fight for a long time, and he came up against an up-and-coming welterweight contender who was just way too long, way too slick in the stand-up, had too good of footwork, pretty much just target practicing with the Leech. He's such a good sniper, man. Left hand was on point, check right hook, angles were smooth. But in MMA, you know, when a fighter is there for too long, they're eventually going to get knocked out at some point. And Jingliang, I believe, is the first Chinese fighter in the UFC, or one of the first at least. Been around for a very long time, you know, not as active recently as he's been before, but the way that his fighting style is, I'm actually kind of surprised he never got knocked out in his career up until he fought Prates. He's always going for the knockout. Very exciting fighter. Goes to war with his opponents. And I think Prates is going to be so good in the future that this loss to Prates is not going to look too bad. I would say do Carlos Prates versus Michael Page. That would be an interesting fight. And for Jingliang, maybe a fight with Michael Chiesa. Then what about Walter Walker? Submitting Junior Tafa with a heel hook, but there was no physical tap. It was a verbal tap. And if a fighter screams, that does count as a verbal tap. Before the submission, Tafa looked sharp. He looked fast in the feet, but got wrestled very easily by the bigger man. Junior Tafa looks like he could make 205, but seeing Junior Tafa slap Walker after losing the fight is wild. That's a sure way to lose a lot of fans, not being humble in victory or defeat, especially if you get submitted in the first round. You know, you gotta be a bit respectful to the opponent at that point, you know? I don't know what the whole beef between Tafa and Walker was about, because Walker on the mic was saying something about Johnny Walker, and then he called out Justin Tafa. But if he does get the Tafa fight, it would be a tougher one, since Justin is bigger than Junior, right? He should be able to stuff the takedowns easier than Junior can, but that would be an interesting fight. What about Ricardo Ramos winning a split decision against Joshua Culibao? That first round was crazy. So Culibao hurts Ramos with a leg kick. He throws another one. Ramos is able to avoid it. That causes Culibao to stumble a little bit, and Ramos is able to jump on his back very quickly. That's a very high level move there by Ricardo Ramos, man. And he nearly choked Culibao out. Crazy that Culibao fought out of it. The choke was all the way in on the neck, like tight squeeze, hand behind the head, everything. And Culibao was able to fight out of the rear naked choke and get into the second round, which is the round I think he won, right? Dropping Ramos with leg kicks, landing big hooks, hit him clean with a big straight. He was taunting a lot though. And then in round 3, I had Ramos winning it, landing knees in the clinch, putting more pressure on Culibao and dragging the fight to the ground. He even cut Culibao in that round, which is big. I don't really agree with the scoring criteria rating cuts so highly, but it did help Ramos win that fight. Casey O'Neill won off of her aggression, going first, cutting off the cage well. Santos kept looking for the counter overhand, but it became obvious, and the throws from the clinch were also countered impressively. O'Neill even took the back off of one of Santos's head and arm throws, and it's great to see that women's MMA is evolving or adjusting to the head and arm throw, which has dominated those divisions for a long time. Jack Jenkins obliterating Herbert Burns, landing big body shots, chopping leg kicks, and stuffed a ton of takedowns. Herbert Burns was fighting off the jab mostly, and Jenkins did a good job of fighting past that with his power punches. There was a lot of guard pulling from Herbert Burns, and at some point, does that count like a TKO? Because pulling guards so many times, it gets to a point where like the fight isn't even a thing anymore, you know? Because every single time he pulls guard and then Jack Jenkins steps away, the ref has to get in, stop the timer, tell Herbert Burns to get up, he pulls guard again. Like at some point, maybe the fight should be called off, but eventually Jack Jenkins was able to TKO him, getting a good win there. Tom Nolan landing huge knees and elbows against Alex Reyes, a 6'3" lightweight throwing flying knees and wheel kicks is crazy. Alex Reyes fought well though. He was supposed to get dominated or finish according to the odds, but he used his footwork well and even landed big shots on Nolan. He was going back and forth with him a bit. I was quite impressed with Reyes' ability to fight with Tom Nolan competitively. Song Kinam power and precision punched his way to a win. Rick Glenn was ducking awkwardly with his punches in some like goblin fighting style, like very low stature with his punches and takedowns of course, trying to transition from his boxing to his wrestling, but then he got a huge hematoma and I hope he heals well from that. And finally, Aguilar choking out Nicole after he got back mounted. So Nicole got way too high up on the back after trying to shoot in a deep double leg, head first into a guillotine and just put out cold by Aguilar. And Nicole is a high level grappler too, so an amazing win for Jesus Aguilar. I thought most of the fights on this card were pretty good. And leave in the comments below, what did you guys think of the card? What was your favorite fight, favorite finish? What would you rate it out of 10? I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.